contesting the federal elections of St. Kitts and Nevis due tomorrow, Friday, the 5th of August, 2022. We had sent an invitation. We had invited all of the parties to participate in these interviews. The persons and the parties that have agreed to take part in the interviews before the leader of the Concerned Citizens Movement and Premier of Nevis, the Honorable Mark Brantley. This morning at 10 o'clock, the leader of the Morals Restoration Movement, MRN, Sam Caines, and currently we're with Dr. Janice Daniel Hodge, the leader of the Nevis Reformation Party. And once again, we thank them very much for their participation in these events. As we normally do in the history of One Radio, we make the offer, and we're very delighted with those who have accepted. As I have indicated with the other sessions, the sessions are for 90 minutes. The candidate in this instance, Dr. Janice Daniel Hodge, will be afforded the first 20 minutes to make her opening statement, make her case as if you were, for the to the electorate for this upcoming elections to be held tomorrow. Following that opening statement, I will ask Dr. Hodge, Daniel Hodge, some questions which we deem form the basis of what is out there in the public domain, and also the issues concerning the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. Then Dr. Hodge will have 2 minutes to respond to each question, and 1 minute for a follow-up to answer if there is a follow-up question. In the final 30 minutes of the interview, you, the electorate, and the general public will have the opportunity to call in on 1-869-469-1616 or 1700 to ask the candidate a question, make a comment, and we ask that you organize yourself if you're going to participate in that way. And we ask you kindly, as usual, to keep your comments or questions as brief as possible, but be forceful. We say as brief as possible so that we can accommodate as many of you as we can. As usual, we will not accept anything we deem that is not within our broadcast standards. Indeed, what we try to do always is to look at the issues and move away from insults and personal attacks, etc. I must commend you, the listening audience, through the years to have conformed to that particular standard that we try to have here at Vaughan Radio. Having said that, let me welcome Dr. Janice Daniel Hodge to the interview. And again, thank you very much. And as you make your first comment, Dr. Hodge, you can go right ahead with your statement.
Thank you, Mr. Herbert, and just want to say good afternoon and thank you for the invitation to participate. I would also want to say good afternoon to all who are listening, and we recognize that we are at a very important juncture with regards to the development of Nevis and our country, and it is indeed an opportunity to be able to express my concerns, share my thoughts with regards to how we can move forward. Now, we know that Nevis is at a crossroads. We understand that Nevis has been moving in a downwards direction over the last several years. We recognize that the people of Nevis have been struggling, and the representation that they were expecting from the elected leaders have not been forthcoming. We understand that this is a federal election upon us, and we understand that this federal election is one of much significance. much significance because Nevis has now become entirely dependent upon St. Kitts for its sustenance. And we know that this is not the direction that the people of Nevis would want to go. We know that in the 2015 and 2020 elections, the Concerned Citizens Movement would have represented to the people of Nevis that Nevis deserves its fair share. And they would have represented in 2020 that if they were given all 3 seats, they would be in a much better position to represent the people of Nevis and ensure that we receive our fair share. The people of Nevis would have believed the CCM, they would have listened to the promises and felt that we would provide the CCM with the opportunity to empower us and to help us to chart our course going forward. The CCM representatives would have participated in the federal government for 7 years and did not take the necessary action to ensure that the people of Nevis would receive what is rightfully theirs. The people of Nevis understand that there is a responsibility on behalf of the federal government to provide certain resources and revenues to the Nevis Island administration. However, one cannot expect that an agreement would have been sufficient for that provision to be implemented. Now, we know that the Premier of Nevis would have expressed in his throne speech that it is important to legislate the Charleston Accord to ensure that it is enshrined in some legislation to ensure that the people of Nevis do not have to forevermore be at the mercies of the federal government. And so we recognize going to St. Kitts with 3 strong and in a favorable government, it could be nothing less than neglect why the Charleston Accord was not legislated. And we are saying this is an indication of the level of interest that the CCM government or the CCM representatives have for the people of Nevis. Because for 7 years, they sat in the federal government and did not legislate the Charleston Accord. And so in 2022, coming now after destroying the federal government and indicating that it is because of Nevis's fair share that they were forced to take this action, it is not acceptable, because we know it is much better to collaborate and negotiate than to divide and conquer. And we know that for the last 7 years, the CCM representatives did not submit any cabinet submissions and did not legislate the Charleston Accord. And if that is the way in which the rights of the people of Nevis were to be enshrined in legislation, what is going to be different if they're asked to go back as representatives for Nevis at this time? We have seen over $400 million coming to the NIA or to Nevis, and the people of Nevis cannot indicate or has not been able to demonstrate where they have felt the impact of $400 million coming to Nevis. We have seen some projects that were started, and for the most part they're incomplete. We look at the Early Pier facility that was supposed to have a proper waiting area, proper parking area. $6 million was allocated for that project. What we have now is a pier, a tent, some wooden benches, and no enclosed waiting area. And no one can give an account for the remainder of the money that was allocated for the Newcastle Pier. We go to the Alexandria Hospital, and we see that project was started. Groundbreaking was in 2017, should have been completed within 2 years. We're now in 2022, and we see that that project is still incomplete. We look at the Mondo Track. a project where you have the track but no stands and no proper shelter for the patrons in that area. And so we have seen a pattern of this CCM government where they received the $400 million plus or minus and have not really invested those monies into the development of Nevis, and I may add the sustainable development of Nevis, because most of the monies, based on their reporting, has been put into roads and concrete here and there. And when you look at developing a country, we know that these areas would have to be, well, what has been provided is really temporary, and you would need to go back and spend money in these areas again. Now, we say this considering that geothermal was already started. Geothermal energy is a natural resource that we have, and we know that if it costs $92 or $94 million to deliver geothermal energy to the people of Nevis, had there been any vision or any focus on the part of the CCM representatives, some of that $400 million would have been earmarked, because once you invest in renewable energy, the entire country would benefit from that investment, and we would not have to be seeing the surcharges that we are seeing now, that in some instances the electricity bill is now more than what some persons are working for, even though they have tried their best efforts to conserve as much electricity as possible. We recognize that the economy is in a downward spiral, and while we may consider the pandemic as a factor for that, one must understand that in order to bring investors to the shore, you must be able to negotiate with these investors. We must be able to understand that some of these investors, once they can get a project started, the people of Nevis would benefit from the jobs during the construction period and as well during the operational period. But what we have seen is that without any renewable energy, without any appeal that sets Nevis apart, the investors one by one have dwindled away. And not only is that a major concern that this country, Nevis, has not been placed in a position to be appealing to investors, Nevis is also now in a position where it is very difficult for the people living here to maintain a good standard of living. And so when we look at what is happening, we recognize that the economy is not growing. We recognize that there is no accountability of the resources that would have been received. And we recognize that there is no effort to improve the standard of living for the man and woman on the road. And so when we look at the pandemic, for example, when electricity was being cut from some struggling parents, understanding that schools were closed and our students needed to work from home with electronic devices, there was no mercy demonstrated by the CCM government. We have seen the hospitality industry severely impacted by the pandemic. And when struggling mothers would ask for assistance from the 3 CCM representatives who at the time were receiving a salary for representation in Nevis, a salary for representation in St. Kitts, allowances for their constituencies, sitting on numerous boards, all that they could say is that if you really needed help, your hair wouldn't look so fancy and your fingernails would not look so pretty. And so this is an indication that the CCM representatives are really out of touch of the struggles of people, because what they're saying, unless we see you walking in rags and barefooted, you do not really need any help. And this is unacceptable. The people of Nevis are accustomed to a high standard of living, and such a standard of living that King Nico would have said, Nevis nice. Nevis was nice on the NRP administration, when you had representatives who put country above self, and when you had representatives who understood that to bring the Four Seasons Hotel here, you had to negotiate on behalf of the people of Nevis, understanding that your people would be employed. And when you look at the investment in geothermal energy up to that point, when you look at the Bank of Nevis that was established, and when we say that Nevis is not being developed in a sustainable way at this time, no one can point to any development under this CCM government that has resulted in a development to provide hope for our youths coming out of school. There is no development that is really providing mass employment. And when you look at the Bank of Nevis, for example, that was established when there was a clear vision of where we wanted to take Nevis, and you look at how it has expanded now, providing jobs in our sister island, St. Kitts. When you look at the development that took place in Nevis under the Nevis Reformation Party, you would see that it was clearly a focus on making Nevis sustainable and independent. What we are seeing under the CCM is that Nevis is going backwards. No sustainable development, no self-reliance, and our people are struggling more than they have been for a very long time. And we would not want to place that blame on the global situation. We would place that blame clearly and squarely on the CCM representatives who up to this day have not placed a clear vision for Nevis, where we would want to take Nevis. And we can tell you from the Nevis Reformation Party, we believe in sustainability, and we believe that much can be done to make the development of Nevis more sustainable. And we would want to be able to develop Nevis in such a way that it becomes a model island of sustainability in small island developing states. And we would want to develop Nevis in such a way that we minimize our reliance on external sources. So inasmuch as the CCM administration and the Premier would have found it necessary to take a $12 million commercial loan that we the people must now be paying the interest on, and we the people now have to be paying the high cost of fuel to operate this generator. If there was any vision towards sustainability and self-reliance, we wouldn't be putting Nevis to be more and more dependent on external sources for our everyday living. And we know that electricity is important. In every business you require electricity. In every household you require electricity. And so when this CCM government is, or the representatives are asking about fair share of CBI money, we must ask, why didn't you ask for your fair share of renewable energy when St. Kitts is now having a $70 million solar facility? St. Kitts is now not having to pay surcharge on the electricity bills. Why is it that in St. Kitts you have free school lunch programs and in Nevis the parents have to pay? Why is there so much disparity between the standard of living in Nevis and the standard of living in St. Kitts? And why is it at one time and under NRP, Nevis was the envy of the Caribbean, and we are now a struggling island? Poverty is increasing, and the representatives do not see it fit to take the necessary actions to make living in Nevis sustainable and affordable. And so I'm saying that the CCM representatives have not represented Nevis, and they ought to get a failing grade. They ought to get a failing grade because Nevis has gone backwards under them, and we are now at a crossroad to make a determination and to vote for representatives who we feel has the best interests of Nevis at heart, who we feel has a vision for Nevis and the people of Nevis, who we feel understand that our youth deserve to have some hope in the land of their birth. And so I am saying, at this crossroad, at this time in Nevis's history, let the people of Nevis decide to put Nevis back on a path of peace, progress, prosperity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Hodge, for your opening case, and we will now go to a few questions that I have for you, and then the listening audience will know that you will be able to join us in the last 30 minutes via telephone at 1-869-469-1616 or 1700. First off, Dr. Hodge, you had mentioned in your opening comments the Nevis Island administration and the performance or lack of performance that we see in that, headed by Premier Brantley. And you also referenced the federal government, of which Mr. Brantley, of course, was also a part, and indeed the elections that we're now contesting to form the federal government. As I put to all of the other candidates, not everyone will know and understand that there is indeed a difference, and indeed we are going into tomorrow a federal election. So could you take a minute, if you will, to explain to the audience your understanding of the difference, if there is one, between the operations of the Nevis Island administration and the federal government?
Sure. Well, the NIA is enshrined in our Constitution, and it gives Nevis a certain level of autonomy to determine its own development. And so there are certain areas such as energy, which Nevis has the autonomy to develop and to create a path going forward. But the Constitution also provides that the federal government has certain overarching responsibilities with regards to Nevis. And so when we look at matters such as national security, which is a federal matter, when we look at issues such as taxation, those are federal matters. And so you can look at it, and the simplest way that I can say it is that if you have a circle, and that circle has certain overarching powers, but within that circle you have a smaller circle, which is the NIA, and within that smaller circle, which is the NIA can take necessary action independent of what the federal government's position is in order to develop its own affairs. And so the CBI program, we know, is administered by the federal government. There is no reason why the NIA could not develop a similar program and minimize the reliance on the federal government. But the CBI is a federal program, and the Charleston Accord spoke to the way in which the revenues from the CBI program would be shared with Nevis. And of course, those revenues would then be administered by the NIA. And since Premier Brantley and Minister Brantley deals with the CBI, once those monies are received from the CBI, our rightful monies, may I add, it is the manner in which they have been utilized in Nevis to benefit but just a small few. And when you look at the federal government and the way that the CBI monies are generated, then the federal government, there really should have been that legislation to concretize that relationship with regards to both. And so the Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis has certain oversight and certain responsibilities. Our police force, like I mentioned earlier, comes under the scrutiny of the federal government. But under the NIA, when you look at, for example, Nevis Solid Waste Management Authority, and you have the St. Kitts Solid Waste Management Authority. And so the Nevis Solid Waste Management Authority falls under the scrutiny of the NIA. And I would just add the NASPA, Nevis Air and Seaports Authority, compared to the St. Christopher Air and Seaports Authority. And so the airport, our airport, really falls under a statutory body, which is NASPA, but under the purview of the NIA. And so we must be able to understand the difference between what the federal responsibilities in Nevis are and what the NIA has responsibilities for overall.
And thus, in the last point that you just made, what the Nevis Island administration and representatives are responsible for, and what the federal government and representatives are responsible for. So if we lead off of that, then the Constitution also allows that you have federal, local representatives that can form the NIA, and also federal local representatives from Nevis who can be a part of the federal government.
Correct.
It gives that. Now, Mr. Brantley, who is the Premier, and you, in your answer just now, you pointed out that he also is a representative in both cabinets. What is your view and your party's position in representation of a representative in both cabinets, both the federal cabinet and at the same time the Nevis cabinet, or administration, if you will? We can use them interchangeably.
Yes, well, the Constitution allows for the people of Nevis to be represented at the federal level. Hence, you have 8 seats in St. Kitts and 3 seats in Nevis. Certainly, the political party in Nevis could never form the federal government by itself. You have the majority in St. Kitts. Now, there are certain provisions in the Constitution that allow for certain ministries, for example, to have, where there is no similar arrangement, where there is no similar ministry in Nevis, then that ministry in St. Kitts must have oversight of St. Kitts and Nevis. And I can speak, for example, to the Ministry of Marine Resources, the Department of Marine Resources, where you have Minister Alexis Jeffers being the Minister of Marine Resources in St. Kitts. And he's also the Minister of Marine Resources in Nevis, because there is no Nevis ordinance that speaks to marine resources. And so he deals with both of those. Now, as Minister of Foreign Affairs, as Mr. Brantley is, Premier Brantley is, and Minister of Nevis Affairs, the representation at the federal level must always be to ensure that Nevis's issues and concerns are leveraged at the federal level.
Yet, so Mr. Jeffers, you reference him, Mr. Brantley, both who are, by the way, Mr. Jeffers is the Deputy Premier, and so both of them are representatives in the Nevis Island administration as well as the federal government. You find no fault with that?
I do find some fault with that, not because they're both representatives in both houses. The fault is that they have taken on positions at the expense of the people of Nevis. And so to the extent that the people of Nevis elected those 3 representatives to go to St. Kitts on their behalf to represent the interest of the people of Nevis, they did not do that. They went to St. Kitts and represented the interest of the federal government. And for example, if you look at Minister Evelyn, who is the Minister of Environment and Cooperatives in the federal government, whereas in Nevis you have Minister Brand, who has the portfolio of environment. And so when Minister Evelyn travels, when he comes back, he does not report to the people of Nevis, because he's not representing the people of Nevis in that regard. And so the question is, or what the issue is, the level of representation for the people of Nevis.
In your example, if he is the federal representative, Mr. Evelyn, and Nevis is a part of the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, when he makes the representation, one will argue he makes representation for St. Kitts and Nevis, no?
But remember, there's an NIA, and I point to NASPA and SCASPA, because NASPA has its own budget under the NIA. And so you will not find what happens in SCASPA happening in Nevis. And so when Minister Evelyn, for example, looks at his Ministry of Environment in St. Kitts, and they sit around the table to discuss the budget, one would imagine that you would make some provision to ensure whatever grant funding comes into St. Kitts, Nevis gets its fair share, because remember that the grant funds was also an issue in the Charlestown Accord. But because there is this disconnect, and these ministers feel as if when they go to St. Kitts, they're working for the federal government, and they are indeed working for the federal government. Well, how do they then address the needs of the people of Nevis? And I can give you a perfect example with regards to the Ministry of Marine Resources, which deals with fisheries. Because in St. Kitts, the fishers can get subsidized gas for their boats. The cost of certain equipment for fisheries in St. Kitts is much cheaper than what the fishers in Nevis have. And so, if you're looking out for the best interest of Nevis, as a federal minister, the least that you can do is to ensure that if a grant application is submitted to provide supplies to the fishers in the Federation, why is it cheaper for the people of Nevis, the fishers of Nevis, to pay a boat fare, go to St. Kitts, purchase the equipment, come back up here, when you have a minister representing marine resources in Nevis and in St. Kitts? And so it's really a matter of negligence. The equitable share that should be afforded to the people of Nevis is not being provided for based on how these ministers are operating in the federal government.
So your issue is not whether on principle, law, or structure that you have a problem or issue with them representing Nevis and in the Nevis Island administration and representing Nevis in the federal government, but rather they are performing poorly.
That is the main issue.
That's the main issue.
That is the main issue.
You and your party, therefore, will do similar, do the same, given the opportunity, but perform better?
Well, the issue, keep in mind that the issue of having a seat around the federal table is to ensure that Nevis is represented.
Right, so I'm asking, in the same mode that Mr. Brantley, let's say, is currently the Premier, and he is also the Minister of, or was, the Minister of Foreign Affairs in the federal government. Given the opportunity, and you're running in the election tomorrow, you are one of the leaders, and there is a distinct possibility that you may become the Premier, the Prime Minister. You will be, so that's possible. Anybody can become the Prime Minister because there are 11 seats and anybody become Prime Minister. So, given the opportunity, if you were given the opportunity to become the Premier of Nevis and also a federal minister, example, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, as Mr. Brantley was, to represent Nevis, will you do it?
The issue, Webbo, is this. As Minister of Foreign Affairs, you have responsibilities. You have a ministry to operate and to run. And the perfect example, if I can say, when you look at the one thing, the primary thing that the people of Nevis voted for CCM and sent them to St. Kitts 3 strong to strengthen their arm, to legislate the fair share agreement. That is the one thing that they campaigned upon. They still continue to campaign on it. But they went there and they sat for 7 years. And while they're busy carrying out their duties as Foreign Affairs Minister, they forgot the people of Nevis.
Yeah, but you spoke eloquently for a while about they and their failure. Mm-hmm. My question to you is now about you. Mm-hmm. Would you, having the opportunity to represent Nevis, both in the NIA level and the federal level, without saying exactly which ministry, etc., were you afforded the opportunity, will you take it?
Well, one must agree that representation at the federal level in the best interest of the people of Nevis is required and it's necessary. And so one must understand the reason why the Constitution is constructed the way that it is to afford the people of Nevis to have representation there. And so, yes, if you're afforded the opportunity to sit at around the decision-making table and to advance what is required in the best interest of Nevis, that must be had, because remember, the federal government has certain overarching responsibilities that affect the people of Nevis.
But you must know, Dr. Hodge, then, with that answer, the natural follow-up will be, and yet you spoke contrary for a number of years.
Are you going to ask a question, or do you want me to finish your question?
I'm putting it to you. The follow-up will be, and yet you spoke contrary for a number of years.
And we did speak, and I did speak about the double being able to serve two masters. And I think we have seen clearly why there was a problem with that, because we have seen where the three ministers have now been fired, and we have seen that they sat there for 7 years. And so I would not say that I spoke contrary, because you really, for the NRP, Nevis is our master. Our first priority is Nevis, and we would address the affairs of Nevis. And when we can sit and listen to our premier, who can tell you 10, 12, all these different countries that he has been to, strengthened our passport, and did not do the one thing that the people of Nevis, it shows that they were serving, Nevis was not their priority. And we're saying for NRP, Nevis is our priority, whether at the federal level, at the local level, the masses of people in Nevis. That is our priority. And so any decision taken would have to be in the best interest of the people of Nevis.
You mentioned that and it is a given fact that the Concerned Citizens Movement was in association or in alignment with the People's Labour Party and the People's Action Movement, which formed the last, or the team unity that we are referencing. This election cycle, the Premier was here yesterday, and I asked him the question whether he or his party is aligned with any group or grouping on St. Kitts. Same question.
When you say grouping, you mean political parties?
Political,
Yeah.
yes.
Well, you should not have had to ask that question, Mr. Herbert, because they've been campaigning CCM and PAM all along.
No, well, I do ask the questions.
Okay, so that's why it needed the clarification.
Yes.
And so NRP has said from the get-go that we are not going to be aligned pre-election, but certainly once the people of St. Kitts have voted and their preference for who should be representing them, then we would make a determination. Of course, you mentioned earlier about the possibilities. There's so many different possibilities that to align ourselves politically at this point in time, I think it would be a disservice to what we really want to represent with regards to, inclusiveness as much as possible and representing the wishes of our people and not our self-serving agendas, so to speak. And so we would have indicated that before, and we continue to indicate our election is tomorrow, and we have not aligned ourselves politically with any of the parties in St. Kitts.
So if one were to say or argue that you are aligned with the People's Labour Party and or that you are financed by anyone in St. Kitts as a part of the arrangement, you say what?
I would say that any political party would seek assistance as much as possible. And for those persons who feel that investing in the NRP is the better way to go for Nevis and for the country, and they would want to assist us in getting accomplishing that goal, then by all means, we are not going to say that we are limiting, etc. And so we would say basically that we are able to maintain our arm's length relationship with everyone who has an interest in our party, and quite a number of persons do have an interest in our party because they recognize the way in which the country is going and the way in which Nevis is going. The people really do need a change, at least from the Nevis end.
So if a political party were to do your financing or your campaign financing in part, and one were to deduce from that you have some arrangement or alignment with them, that would be fair?
Repeat the question. If a political party, because you have said that you have no arrangement or alignment with any political party, any group in St. Kitts, and I ask a question so that if persons were to say that you were aligned with the People's Labour Party and or being financed by it, you would say, you answered by saying that of course you can accept, contributions. So the follow-up question was, if one were to say then that if you are being partially or wholly, whatever, financed by a political on St. Kitts, and one were to deduce as a consequence of that you are aligned or with them, is it a fair deduction? I think it would be a fair deduction to say that there are political parties in St. Kitts that the NRP has been in discussions with. Of course, we're preparing for the possibility of forming the federal election, and so whatever arrangement has been put in place, or whatever arrangement has been discussed, there is no alignment with any one political party in St. Kitts, as we see with the CCM and PAM relationship.
So you have discussions ongoing for possibilities. It's just that it is not public.
Well, I think it's public. I've said it over and over again. I maintain, you must maintain cordial relationship.
Okay, so which parties do you have, or have you said you have those discussions with?
I have had discussions with the Labour Party. I've had discussions, when I say the Labour Party, these are not necessarily, NRP and Labour sit down around a table and discuss. But I have had conversations, let me put it differently. I've had conversations with the leader of Labour, I've had conversations with the leader of PLP, and I've had conversations with the leader of PAM.
And those discussions lead or include a possible amalgamation of some sort after the election, equivalent to, for instance, the arrangement that Mr. Branty says he has with PAM?
Discussion along the lines that there is so much uncertainty in what is going to come out of the election, but more in terms of philosophical reasoning and mutual interest in the development of the country.
Let me ask the question this way. Is there a political party on St. Kitts that you and your party has a preference to join with?
Well, I cannot say that there is a preference. We have looked at our relationship. We've had a relationship before with PAM, and NRP was able to accomplish what it set out to. We have had a relationship with Labour, and even though that was not a coalition, so to speak. And so we have worked with those two political parties before. Of course, PLP is a new party. The only Nevis party that had a relationship would have been the CCM, and we see how that ended. But we also know that CCM would have been involved in the motion of no confidence against the Labour Party. And so we really, look at some of the philosophical similarities and the mutual interest, and those are the issues that would really guide where we are. For example, the issue of fair share. Any discussion must understand that this is a matter of urgency. This is a matter that must be legislated. Of course, even if NRP gets all 3 seats, which is a very strong, high possibility, and we go, 3 NRP candidates alone cannot ensure that that happens. But the ability to negotiate and to reason and understand that Nevis and the people of Nevis is our first priority, I think that is where the difference comes in.
You just mentioned the issue of fair share. Let's look at that. The other 2 candidates or leaders that we've had, Mr. Brantley said emphatically that his and his party's main issue in this election, the main platform, as you say, when we're campaigning, is the fair share for Nevis. Mr. Caines of the MRM was here this morning, and he says emphatically that is his and his party's main issue for this campaign. Same question. What is your party's main issue or issues for this campaign?
Well, obviously, our main issue has to be proper and adequate representation for the people of Nevis. It goes much beyond just the fair share, and if you're speaking specifically about the CBI, because there are a number of areas that are governed by the federal government that must be addressed if the people of Nevis are truly going to benefit from their constitutional rights. And so the fair share issue, to me, it's really just a small portion with regards to nation building. And we are looking at the fact that you must have effective relationships. We must understand that our goal and our vision of developing Nevis is paramount. And so our main issue really is that Nevis deserves proper representation, and that Nevis must always be represented so that the people of Nevis can see the benefit. Of course, let me qualify this. Fair share is important, yes. Fair share beyond the CBI, because we know that the maritime resources, we know that there are a number of other areas that must be looked after. And so you cannot just focus on fair share, because then all of the grant funding that comes in to deal with renewable energy and climate change and all of those would be left aside, as we have seen in the past. And so it must be a comprehensive look at what is in the best interest for Nevis. And so Nevis being our first priority, Nevis at the center of our decision making. That is what is important.
Okay, I understand your point that the fair share in reference to, and I think most when we folks talk about it, we're specifically talking about the CBI monies, right? You are in favor of Nevis getting its fair share of the CBI monies, as has been bandied about and talked about. For instance, Mr. Brantley said yesterday that the total amount, by his information, somewhere over $5 billion. He said that Nevis got approximately 7%, St. Kitts 93%. And Mr. Caines and himself have said that they're going to try and get it up to maybe 20% or 25%, whichever is the equitable amount. What is your position on that?
I think really we need to look at this holistically, and I cannot say what the 20% would be. We've received 7%. Definitely once it goes through the process of legislating our equitable share of all of the various, whether it's natural resources, financial resources, etc., then we would derive at the equation. Because if you look at, for example, and say you want to get it up to 20%, we have not seen the results of the census data. We know that the population in Nevis is going. Suppose after you sit down and you negotiate for 20%, you realize that we should be getting 30%. And so you must have the necessary data and the necessary expertise to be able to guide these decisions. And, I am not here just to say what I think is a popular thing to say. Definitely, if Nevis is our first interest and our first priority, then we would ensure that whatever decisions are taken are in the best interest of the people of Nevis. And so, yes, there's certain steps that must be made in order to determine what our equitable share is. And I wouldn't even begin to put a number. But yes, I would definitely fight for Nevis's equitable share, not just in CBI, but in all of the other assets that the people of Nevis have constitutional rights in.
You have evaluated the Concerned Citizens Movement over the past 7 years as being a failure in terms of representation for Nevis at the federal level, correct?
Correct.
At the same time, you also acknowledge, did you not, that they got $400 million but wasted it?
Yes, I did acknowledge that.
Mr. Brantley argues that getting $400 million over 7 years is a stellar performance when compared to the years preceding that, when the NRP was a part of the federal government. You say what?
I say, as when you compare where NRP was and where we are today, keep in mind that NRP did not campaign and promise the people of Nevis that we would get your fair share. They campaigned and said that we will get your fair share. And they mashed up the government, as they say, and they still did not get the fair share. And it just shows that because NRP is more about the people of Nevis and developing Nevis, NRP was able to do so much because we are moving towards being self-reliant and not have to be dependent on anyone else. And so even though what the arrangement by which they managed to receive the $400 million, the fact remains that there is still no constitutional or no legislative agreement in place. And for the Premier to sit here today and said, oh, he had an agreement and somebody didn't follow up with the agreement. Well, he's a lawyer, and he said it. He said it in the throne speech in 2018, that one of his objectives is to ensure that the Charleston Accord is enshrined in legislation. And he knows that that step was required. And so if you know that that step is required, and you're busy doing all of your foreign affairs work and civil aviation, and our airport still cannot see passenger jets come in, how can we say that the people of Nevis have really seen any benefits from being represented by Premier Brantley in the federal government?
In the legislation that you're referencing, you're suggesting that he ought to have legislated the Charleston Accord?
I am saying that he should have made a cabinet submission, and from that cabinet submission, move it to the next step, which would have been for some legislative change. Now, what would be required? What would be required between the cabinet submission and the parliamentary submission? That has to be worked out. But not even a cabinet submission was made for it to be debated in the cabinet. Whereas he claimed, and this is why I say people were misled, because you had all three CCM ministers who would sit around the cabinet table, and of course when that motion was put on the table, they would approve it. And we know that they were very good allies with the PAM, who had 4 representatives. So you would have had 7 of the 11, and you would have been able to move what pieces of legislation you would have wanted to get moved. But it's a total neglect for the people of Nevis. That you campaigned on it. You put it in your throne speech. Yes, this is what I need to do. But yet you still didn't do it, and now putting blame elsewhere.
So if one were to ask, if you have a document with a number of line items for its operation or something. And when it comes to the execution of it, let's say you have 6 items. The other 5 are executed. But when it comes to the 6th, you are told that that needs to be legislated. When all 6 were under the same document. If one were to put that argument to you, based on what you just explained, you would say what?
I would say that again the CCM representative neglected the people of Nevis, because the motion of no confidence was also part of the Charlestown Accord, and that was legislated. I don't know who is stuck on motion of no confidences, but we see that that was in the Charlestown Accord and it was legislated, and that is why the Prime Minister had to take action within a certain period of time, because of what happened in the first motion of no confidence with then Prime Minister Douglas and how long he took. So
the motion of no confidence was in the Charlestown Accord?
There was a provision for the motion of no confidence.
To say that they will do what? They will have a strength
to ensure that there can be some timeline.
Yes.
For action to be taken.
Yes.
After the experience with then Prime Minister Douglas.
Yes.
Right? And so we see there was a motion of no confidence there, and we know who passed that. Now we see another motion of no confidence, and we know who was behind that. But I'm saying when you look at the affairs for the people of Nevis, the Charlestown Accord also had provisions for financing for geothermal development, but nothing was done with that.
Yes.
We saw provisions for equitable share of grant resources.
Right, but you would agree that some of the items that were in the Charlestown Accord were executed without being legislated.
And I imagine some of them did not require legislative action.
That the support,
cabinet support maybe, would have been sufficient.
Right, and also that Timothy Harris will be the Prime Minister. It was supported by the others. That wasn't legislated. That a Prime Minister will serve no more than 2 terms consecutively.
Yes.
They attempted to legislate that.
I cannot speak specifically to that.
Right. So when you so your position is that Mr. Brantley and his colleagues ought to have legislated the fair share. So they erred.
They erred. Okay. At least make a cabinet submission and have it debated. And if at that juncture you did not get the results that you wanted, then by all means, I am sure that all of Nevis would have been supporting him.
Okay.
Because that is what we sent him to do.
So you find no fault with the Prime Minister to have signed the document and not executed it as well?
One thing I've learned a long time ago, I am not a lawyer by training, and I cannot give you the specifics about the legalities of certain agreements, etc., and so I cannot speak to that. I see it as the representatives for Nevis should ensure that whatever was in the Charlestown Accord for the benefit of the people of Nevis should have been advanced by the representatives from Nevis.
Let's run through. We are getting to the close where the caller participation will be invited. But I have a couple of very important issues also that we like to touch on. Premier Brantley also yesterday said that the Unity administration had drafted a document that would have, as far as the elections are concerned, which, if passed, would have affected the what we call overseas voters in terms of their ability to vote. It would not have expunged them, but it would have made it difficult. And you know, some of those voters here in this election, had it been passed, it might have been very difficult for them to have participated. The question is, what is your view of the participation of what we call overseas voters in our elections?
Well, that question is really not a black and white response. It's not I agree or I do not agree, because there are a number of issues that have to be considered. And of course we know that you have overseas voters, citizens of St. Kitts and Nevis who live abroad. They contribute to their family members here, and in fact some of them, invest in St. Kitts and Nevis.
So generally in principle, because we can't go into all the details, but generally in principle, do you think that people who are overseas should be afforded or encouraged to be able to participate?
So, and what I would say, in principle, this is something that would have to be looked at in its entirety, and not just somebody, making a decision yes or no. All of the factors must be considered before a decision is made on that.
We spoke earlier about the Nevis Island administration, the federal government, the functions of it. And it is quite possible that you may have, for instance, at this juncture, that let us say that the CCM forms the Nevis Island administration at this moment. The election is tomorrow for the federal government. Let us say your party was successful as you predict, getting the 3 seats. You also said that you will fight for Nevis's share as well, not just in the CBI monies, but overall. You also mentioned, so you will do that. If you were to get, for instance, the remaining monies that Mr. Brantley says, and the monies going forward from the CBI fund that is due to Nevis, if you were to get that as a federal representative, what will you do with it?
Well, certainly, of course, it's belongs to the people of Nevis, and you have certain programs that are federally sponsored programs, but also we have certain matters, like I mentioned, the increasing cost of living here in Nevis that has overarching reach, and so that money, of course, would go to the NIA because that is where it is supposed to go. But of course, you must be able to articulate the areas that need addressing, and so certainly renewable energy must be at the top. We have been blessed with all these natural resources, and we're allowing them to go to waste. People are struggling. So natural resources is definitely an issue. Our healthcare system, that the lack of necessary equipment is a major concern. We look at our youths and job opportunities, and so you must create industries that can employ the youths and give them some hope for the future. We must also look at our young people who go abroad to study. They come back, they have these large student loans, blooming interest, and no assistance. And we know how high the cost of living is.
So you would send the monies to the NIA with those caveats?
Well, definitely allocations on how it is, we would recommend that this is how the money should be allocated, right? And so based on where we are now, like I said, there are certain federal programs and there are certain social programs that can be administered as a federal minister. And one of the things that we have discussed is the need to have a federal building, a proper federal building here in Nevis that administers all of the federal programs, because as it is right now, there's a lot of commingling and people are not able to distinguish what's a federal program or what is a NIA program, so to speak. And so once that federal building is established and you run the federal programs from there, there are a number of areas where we can provide assistance to the people of Nevis. And again, as you discuss the CBI and equitable sharing, all of these things would be looked at because you will have federal representation.
So in effect, the Premier of Nevis will not be able to dictate how those funds are used.
Well, you can make recommendations and you can make allocations as you see necessary. At the end of the day, when he presents his budget, his NIA budget, and he has that's where those debates would come in and where the public would be involved.
The other two candidates asked a similar question as well. As you know, the campaign goes on; it's almost to an end. How important you think it's the credibility and integrity of the campaign of the candidates who are offering themselves to the public and the electorate, how important it is for the public to be knowledgeable in reference to that.
Well, I think it's important. I mean, when you speak of governance and representation, you would want persons with integrity. You would want a person who would be representing your best interest, and so I think it's of utmost importance that you have people with integrity to represent you.
And that the public, for instance, you have been you have a record of achievements and so on, and the public is fair game for the public to look at that.
Absolutely.
I'm going to refer to an area or some areas that in some instances one can call a vexing issues. In reference to Mr. Brantley, the Prime Minister had released some information in reference to one of his cabinet ministers, Mr. Brand, and that he had applied to the CBI for a particular development. You weighed in on it, and you suggested, based on the information that you saw, that ought to cause, and you were asking for Mr. Brand's resignation in reference to that, correct?
Correct.
And you also binded Mr. Brantley to it in some way, and saying basically, as the leader, he also was culpable, correct?
Correct.
Yes. Mr. Caines, when he was here, he also put forth the fact that he, as part of his resume, he was one of the stellar, perhaps he said maybe even the best ever director at the Four Seasons Resort. And then he was questioning it, and I asked him whether or not he thought it was fair game against that backdrop in the headline, and he said yes. And then I asked, and then with you, Mr. Brantley, similarly had read from a document suggesting that you were the head of a government department while you worked in St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and there was some investigation and so on, and we know of that, correct?
Correct, yes.
And Mr. Brantley has repeatedly asked you to explain to the electorate concerning that and your involvement and your part in it. Do you think also that that is fair game for him to ask and for the public to ask?
I don't have a problem. I think it is fair for if he would want to ask about my involvement in that investigation. Going back to your prior question, I think the issue really is that a question was not asked. There were allegations made and some untruths told, and that, as we call it, slandering. And
in terms of the investigation or the document that he read from, that he purportedly read from?
In terms of what he would have said, because he would have known what the situation was, and based on what was discussed, I would have indicated as a matter of transparency, because I had nothing to hide, at my very launch about the investigation. And I had nothing to hide, because here you had an entire department being investigated. And I use the analogy because I think this is much easier for people to understand, that if you have a school and you have a primary school, grade 1 to grade 6, and a principal, and there's an investigation of the school, then as a teacher in that school, you would be investigated as well. And if at the end of the investigation, you had the grade 2 teacher and the grade 4 teacher going to jail, if you had the principal going to jail or even having to pay back money, but my class was found free of any wrongdoing, and the allegation that was made was that people under me went to jail, and that is absolutely false, because no one, to use the analogy of the classroom, neither myself nor anyone in my classroom were found responsible for any wrongdoing. None in my department went to jail or had to pay back any money. And because the program that I was in charge of was a federal program, even when I left and came home to be with my father, that federal program, the federal agencies were only comfortable if I came back to run that program and put it back on track, because they would have looked at all of my records. Everything was transparent, everything was clear, there was no wrongdoing, and that is why they called me back.
So the issue itself, you have no problem with that being put on the table and discussed. Your issue is that some of the information was inaccurate.
Yes.
Okay. Now, thank you. As I promised, we're going to go through the calls now. 1-869-469-1616 for Dr. Daniel Hodge. We ask you again, please, to if you waiting for a while, we ask you to hold on. We're going to try and accommodate as many of you as possible, because we deem it very important that you are able to talk directly with the candidate. Good afternoon. You're on the air for Dr. Hodge.
Good afternoon, Mr. Webbo. I have a question. I'm not sure it's directly to Dr. Hodge, but I don't know if this question was put to any of the other representatives. But if we have federal government and we have Nevis Island administration, I can't understand why we can't have an island administration for St. Kitts and the federal government taking care of both islands together as they should, not federal government representing St. Kitts and their Nevis Island administration representing Nevis and no representation for St. Kitts. So I would like to know what Dr. Hodge thinks about that, and even the other representatives. Why don't we have a separate island administration for St. Kitts? Thank you.
Dr. Hodge?
Well, that goes to the framers of the Constitution and what they would have envisioned for the development of St. Kitts and Nevis. Certainly, it is something that, based on the public interest, can be looked at, and that is why so often you hear about the need for constitutional reform, because Constitution from 1983 to where we are today, certainly there are some things that would need to be adjusted.
Again, the numbers for Dr. Hodge, to Dr. Daniel Hodge, 1-869-469-1616 and or 1700. You have a question or comment you would like to make, even if you would like to give her and her party your best wishes for the election coming up tomorrow. By the way, while we're waiting for the folks to weigh in, Dr. Daniel Hodge, I think someone is here, so let me come back to them first. Good afternoon. You're on the air for Dr. Daniel Hodge.
Good afternoon, sir. Is she a citizen of St. Kitts and Nevis and still a citizen of the U.S. Virgin Islands? Can you please find out if this is dual citizenship, rather?
I think that's a fair question, because the Constitution requires that you be a citizen of St. Kitts and Nevis to run for office. And so I am a citizen of St. Kitts and Nevis. I was a citizen of the U.S. Virgin Islands, and that was one of the requirements. I had to relinquish that U.S. citizenship, and that even speaks to the issue where I know Mr. Brantley is aware that when you go to relinquish your U.S. citizenship, if there's any charge of any kind against you, they would not allow you to relinquish your citizenship until they deal with any matter that they have an interest in. And so currently I'm not a citizen of the USA, and I had no problems at all getting my exit from them.
Good afternoon. You're on the air for Dr. Daniel Hodge. Good afternoon. You're on the air for Dr. Daniel Hodge.
Hi, yes, good afternoon. I just wanted to say, Ms. Daniels, you are fantastic. It is such a pleasure hearing you. You can definitely understand the issue. I call you Quiet Storm. We're rooting for NRP from our end of the spectrum. Love how you laid it out. Couple of things that I wanted to ask the host. You mentioned a number of things about Mark and what he presented. Has there been a document or anything like that that has been released that speaks to what Mark said he presented in Parliament? That's one of the questions that I have, because at this point it's hearsay, right?
Caller. What is the question you asked? If a document was presented in Parliament?
No. The question is, Mark mentioned that there's a number of things, as your question that he posed to Janice, that, where the Prime Minister agreed to certain things without it being a bill. My question is, do we know what the list of things were that the CCM team presented to the Prime Minister, or is this just based on hearsay?
Do you mean, Dr. Hodge, your understanding? Or do you mean the Charleston on card?
I think I understand the question.
Oh, okay.
And if I were in the Premier's position, and I know I made my cabinet submissions to accomplish certain things, I would be waving it, high in the sky, because this is what was required. And so, since he has not submitted any, and we have heard him say that he didn't see the need to submit because he had an agreement, and we have heard the Prime Minister say that no cabinet submissions were made, I think it's fair to deduce that the people of Nevis were neglected and nothing was done to help advance that particular issue.
Exactly, and that was the point. I think the Nevis people is trying to understand what is this screaming about. Okay, we understand he didn't make a submission for fair share. However, on the other end now, we're hearing that a personal request was yet again presented into Parliament. So the question is, what was actually presented? And at this point, if they want anyone to trust what they're saying, they need to present the facts. And I distinctly remembered a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month, someone asked him to bring the document during an event, and he never did. So it leaves one to wonder, what was it that he submitted? And I'm not expecting PM Harris to put it out there, because in truth, he has been very fair, in my opinion, so far, in not really releasing what's really in there. Because I believe if he released it, I think our heads will be spinning right now. And
okay.
Because he operates in a leadership position, I think he's holding back a number of stuff. So the question, additionally, with what Janice, I'm from the Virgin Islands as well. I'm not sure if you hear the accent, but I knew of you, I heard of you. I think we may have passed in passing, and you walked away with a stellar performance. I can attest to that. And it was beautiful to see that the governor came out and gave you his endorsement. Well deserved. We're rooting for you, and we're rooting for the NRP team. You guys rock. With that being said, I'll allow other callers to come through.
Okay, thank you. 1-869-469-1616 or 1700 for Dr. Daniel Hodge. Good afternoon. You're on the air for Dr. Daniel Hodge.
Good afternoon. Hi, Janice. Hi, Webbo. Hi, Janice. This is Dilip.
Hi.
And I'm calling to wish you all the best tomorrow in the elections. I don't have a question, but I have a comment, because I know all these talk and allegations are coming up against you with the situation here in the Virgin Islands. But like everybody else, I did my own research, because as my area representative, I wanted to make sure that I was choosing the right person to represent us over in the St. James's area. I did my research, and what I was really, I must say, what really gave me that decision to give you high marks is that I talked to some of the senators who worked alongside you when you were here. Mm-hmm. All the majority senators that you worked with, not one of them said to me that you ever mentioned or to get recognition by stating who your father was. And I felt really pleased and contented when I heard that you never used your father's name to get recognition. And they were all as astonished and amazed as to the allegations that are leveled against you over in Nevis. And I just wanted to make that abundantly clear. I wish you all the best. I think you are change that Nevis needs, and we need to, as women especially, in this matter that you are dealing with, we need to stand up as women and say no to what the system is doing and what they are always doing to women, in that they are sullying, they set out to sully people's good names, and I wish you all the best in the elections tomorrow. I know you can do it, and we really appreciate the change that you are bringing in the political scene. Thank you, and I love you dearly.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. You're on the air for Dr. Daniel Hodge.
Yes, good afternoon, calling from Satola. I would like to ask Dr. Hodge if she agreed with the statement that Honorable Timothy Harris said about Nevis One think it's money, if she agreed with that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Of course, if I am here to represent the people of Nevis, I cannot agree with that statement. I think at the end of the day, you must look at where people are at the time, and I would say no, I cannot agree with that statement, but I have not heard the entire context of the statement or what was being referred to. But I can never agree with a position that says the people of Nevis, all we want is what St. Kitts have. I cannot agree with that statement.
Good afternoon. You're on the air for Dr.
Good afternoon, Webbo. Good afternoon, Dr. Daniel Hodge.
Good afternoon.
Now, you said that you would not go into any relationship with a party in St. Kitts with a clear demand as to what you want, because you would want it to be legislated. Now, what do you expect in the interim?
I can't recall saying that I would not go in with a clear demand as to what I...
Now, we're talking about the percentage and whatever, right? And you said you will negotiate it, and you wanted it legislated. Now, that takes time, eh?
Mm-hmm.
So I was just wondering, what would you expect during the interim? Would you expect to get maybe monthly transfers, or would you have to wait until the matter was legislated to start to receive Nevis share? That's the question.
Well, there are two approaches to that. One, I really believe in structure, and we know that the NIA would have passed a budget where the Premier indicated that he expected to receive $45 million from the federal government.
Mm-hmm.
I know also that he endorsed the federal budget that included $45 million. Now, the next budget debates are going to be in December, and during that period of time, you would be able to get sufficient information. And of course, when you get that information, if you have to do what they call retroactive to where we get what is rightfully ours, then that can be brought into the table. But by no means am I indicating that we're going to go in and sit down and just wait until the legislation is passed. There's a lot of work that has to be done to inform the legislation that is to be passed. And part of that work would be to see, what we were getting, what the CCM representatives should have been doing and negotiating for, so that once that legislation is passed, it is clear. And as my colleague, Dr. Bartlett, would say, if the matter has to go to court, then it would go to court. I don't think it would, because I think in NRP we have good representation. We know how to negotiate. We know how to be reasonable. We know that we're doing what we're doing in the best interest of the people. Excuse me?
Now, in the historical relationship between St. Kitts and Nevis in terms of finances, as you indicated, Mr. Parry, Mr. Amory, and now Mr. Brantley, there seems to be a general unwillingness of St. Kitts to acknowledge that the citizenship by Nevis belong to both St. Kitts and Nevis. What could you possibly do to change that attitude? That is my question.
Well, we definitely should be able to learn from past experiences and not, fall into similar situations. We must be able to grow from the experience that we would have had. And so understanding, and this is why I think the people of Nevis are so upset with CCM, because they had the best opportunity ever with the Charleston Accord signed by the Prime Minister, by the Deputy Prime Minister, and by the leader of CCM. And the Premier of Nevis allowed that to dissolve into thin air.
Good afternoon. You're on the air for Dr. Daniel Hodge. Okay, I'm very sorry. Could you please call back? Callers, we're asking you to be patient. We're trying to accommodate as many of you as possible. 1-869-469-1616 and or 1700 to be on the air to engage with Dr. Daniel Hodge of the Nevis Reformation Party. Good afternoon. You're on the air for Dr.
Good afternoon, Webbo. Just bear with me here. I'm so sorry. Good afternoon, Dr. Hodge.
Good afternoon.
I, as a woman, first of all, am extremely proud to know that one of our very own is leading one of the parties here in St. Kitts Nevis, and for the federal seat, and I guess by extension, the local seat, which will be coming in not too short. One of the things that I'm deeply disturbed about, and I think I've listened to a whole bunch of stuff over this period, when I listen to one of the leaders of the Concerned Citizens Movement make reference to you as a nobody, I was grossly... I'm still in disbelief. I keep waiting to hear an apology coming somewhere that I didn't really mean to say that. Because in the times that we're living in...
Caller, just so you know, we are trying to accommodate as many people, so try and, compress your point. Go ahead.
Thank you, Webbo. Listen, let me make it quick. Anyone who is purporting to be a leader of an organization, of a country, of a division, of a company, that will make such a nasty and disrespectful comment towards another person, be it a member or one of their own kind or not, to say those type of things, knowing very well that our young people are listening and observing, what a horrible example of that to be said. And I would like Mr. Jeffers to please understand that he has sunk to the lowest ebb, and he needs to come back and apologize to the people of Nevis and to you, Dr. Hodge, for that statement. You cannot tell me that I am expected to vote for somebody to lead me who will make this type of statement against a fellow citizen of this country and think that's okay. It's not okay. It's one of the most disappointing parts of this election process that I've heard thus far. Dr. Hodge, I am wishing you the very best, and I am hoping and praying that we will see you come out victorious along with your other party members.
Okay, caller, to be fair, right? We have other folks waiting, and I think that you've made a point. Dr. Hodge is nodding ahead. Okay? Good afternoon. Good afternoon. You're on the air for Dr. Daniel Hodge.
Good afternoon, Herbert. That caller there is just...
No, you
No, come later now. Dr. Hodge, how could you say that these people fed up with CCM? Where do you get that notion from? That Nevis people is fed up I don't know where you get that notion, my friend. You have a good luck to you.
Okay.
Well, I got it from walking the streets of Nevis and talking to so many people, and that is their response. I don't think all of them would tell lies the way that these CCM representatives do, and so I believe when they say that they're really fed up with the non-performance.
1-869-469-1616-1700. We're encouraging you, if you want to engage with the candidate, Dr. Hodge, leader of the Nevis Reformation Party. Again, as we said from the onset, we are encouraging you to organize your statement, your point, or your question so that you can take as little time as possible so we can accommodate as many of you as we can, and we ask you to be considerate. Good afternoon. You're on the air for Dr. Daniel Hodge.
Good afternoon. Keith and Mrs. was talking about the CCM representatives that are like...
Excuse me. Hello. You're on the air for Dr. Daniel Hodge.
Wait, I'm speaking to her.
Sorry, I thought I was hearing an echo or something in the background. That's why I said that. Go ahead, please.
All right then. Well, okay then. But what about the statement you all passed? I usually hear you all up and down saying that you all would not put representative for this local and the federal election. So you all mind about that too?
It is a matter of having to be able to adjust and deal with situations as they come upon you. The NRP was preparing to contest the local election. Because of the abrupt end of the federal cabinet for the federal government, of course we must make adjustments as we see fit. And so while we would say something based on that situation, we must be able to respond to changes that are being made. And I think the people of Nevis would understand where we are and how we got to here at this point in time. When I said that the CCM representatives have lied, I heard Mr. Alexis Jeffers said, I'm a nobody. I'm sure that I am somebody. I've heard him said he asked me a question about the fourth house. He never did ask me that question. I heard Mr. Brantley said, people under me, working under me, went to jail. That never happened. And I heard Mr. Eric Evelyn speak about whether or not donkeys could vote and that sort of thing. And so I am not just making things up. These are things that I've heard, and I know that they're lies, and that is why I can say that they lie.
1-869-469-1616-1700. We are almost at the end of the agreed time. If you call now, we will be able to accommodate you for perhaps a minute or so. Other than that, Dr. Daniel Hodge, we would like to say how much we appreciate you participating in this discussion. We wish you all the very best in the polls tomorrow. Wish you and your party all the very best in the polls tomorrow. And again, thank you very much for participating. You have the final minutes in order to make your closing argument.
Thank you. And thank you as well for giving me this opportunity. And tomorrow, as I would have said at the outset, Nevis is at a crossroads, and the people of Nevis, really, we're asking you to recognize where we are, recognize where we were and where we would want to be. The NRP has a clear vision of how we would want to see Nevis develop, and so we're asking you to come out in your numbers. We know that the federal election has not always been of that much significance to the people of Nevis, but this federal election is like none before. We would have sent 3 representatives, 2 St. Kitts, and they came back before the term was up. They did not deliver for us. They have put Nevis back into a state of dependency on the federal government. We're asking the people of Nevis to give the NRP an opportunity to put Nevis back on a new direction, to make Nevis nice again, to have a feeling of what true representation is really about. We know that under the NRP before, Nevis prospered. We saw the development of Nevis that today is really still the lifeline of Nevis. We have not seen such development under a government, on the CCM government, which is mostly self-serving and looking out for a tiny few. I am the representative in Nevis 11, St. Thomas's and St. James, and I'm asking you to give me the opportunity to represent you at the federal level and bring the change that we would want to be able to see. To Mr. Rohan Isles in number 10, I'm asking you to give him that chance as well. And to Dr. Bartlett in number 9. We know that the NRP has brought to you 3 competent candidates, and we understand representation, we understand good governance, we understand the perspectives of our struggling mothers and the women in our society. We understand our youths who have no future with regards to employment opportunities under this government. And so we're saying we recognize these issues, and that is why we are here presenting ourselves to give you a viable option to see Nevis turn around and get back to be the envy of the Caribbean. Do not take this election lightly. Come out and be a part of the change that Nevis so desperately needs. Dr. Patricia Bartlett in 9, Mr. Rohan Ayers in 10, and myself, Dr. Janice Daniel Hodge, in 11. Thank you all and happy Elections Day.
Thank you once more, and we thank you for listening and thank all of you who have supported. Do not forget to join us here tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock for the count.
The views and opinions expressed on the preceding